This is biology on September 8th, 2014, and we are finishing up Chapter 1, Section 2 notes. So, all living things use energy, and the process, all the chemical processes that are going on in your body right now, that's metabolism. And it takes energy to maintain your cells, it takes energy to grow, it takes energy to reproduce. Everything you do takes energy. So you get that energy from food, and there are a bunch of chemical processes in your body that take that food, here's Chex Mix, I'm hungry, and break it down into simple chemical compounds that these cells can use to move wastes, to produce other chemicals, to reproduce themselves. If your cells were not able to reproduce, when an individual cell in your arm died, you'd have one less cell in your arm. If enough of those cells die, suddenly you don't have an arm anymore. So your lifespan is longer than the lifespan of any of your individual cells because your cells are able to reproduce themselves. They're doing it right now. So, for a nice large multicellular organism such as yourself, you use food that gets broken down to things your cells can use. What about single-celled organisms? What if this is the whole organism? Can they take in Chex Mix? No. They have different ways of taking in energy. I mean, they still take in food, but it's got to be food that will fit within their cell. So just maintaining your cells takes energy. Growing takes energy. Reproducing your cells takes energy. We measure energy in calories. So without enough calories, what happens to you? You die. This is kind of like too hot, you die. Too cold, you die. Too much water, you die. Too little water, you die. Not enough calories, you die. And we're living at a very weird point in history as a species. For most of the history of all species, there have not been too many calories available. You're all aware that we live in a calorie-rich environment. You can consume more calories than you can burn off any day of the week as a person living in an industrialized nation. For most of you, it is possible to find and consume more calories than you need to survive. And those calories might not be great calories. They might be in the form of corn syrup and, other things that are of questionable value. But you can get the calories you need to survive. And your body will run on them. Your body will run on those calories. So the word metabolism, have you heard that in some other context before? People talk about it all the time. What do they say about metabolism? You have a what? You have a high metabolism. Man, that kid can eat anything. He can eat Snickers bars and Big Macs and milkshakes all day, sit on the couch, and still lose weight. He's got a crazy metabolism. Be nice. So metabolism is more than just how you burn your food. Metabolism is the sum of all the chemical processes that are happening in your body. So right now, we said there are cells in your hand that are dying and cells that are reproducing. Those chemical processes are part of your metabolism. There are cells in your body that are transporting bits of sugar to other cells. Cells in your body that are transporting oxygen to other cells to be used. Those are all parts of your metabolism. So your metabolism is the big, whole, total picture of all the chemical processes you're going through right now. And every living thing has a metabolism. A sunflower has a metabolism. A mouse has a metabolism. Bacteria has a metabolism. It's much simpler than yours because it's just the chemical processes that one cell's going through. But every living thing has chemical processes that it uses to keep itself alive, and those are its metabolism. Question. Homeostasis. Homeo meaning same, stasis, steady. It is steady state. Stable conditions. Every single living thing has to maintain stable conditions. For a single-celled organism, For a single-celled organism, that maintaining steady conditions might not be much more, it usually isn't much more, than controlling how much water they have in their cell. So all of your cells are full of water. Single-celled organism cell is full of, it's watery stuff called cytoplasm. Under certain conditions, you can absorb water. You have probably all absorbed or lost water through your skin. How do you know that that happened? How do you know that water was either absorbed or lost through your skin? No, that comes out of actual pores and glands and ducts. Anybody spent too much time in the bathtub or in a bucket of water? Happens to your fingers. They get all pruny. And wrinkly. So yeah, that's because the cells in your skin have actually gained and lost water. So we'll talk more later this year about how cells do that, how cells can gain and lose water. But a single-celled organism can end up in a situation where water is coming into the cell. What happens if you blow up a balloon with too much air? Guess what happens if you keep adding water to a single-celled organism? Same thing, it pops. So a single-celled organism has a way to get that water out of its cell. It has these neat little things. It can form little pockets within its tissue, and it basically reforms the cell wall, and it kicks that water right straight out. We'll talk a lot more about that when we talk about actual transport systems. But a single-celled organism, even that one-celled thing, has to control how much water it's got, or it will explode. So, you, my friends, have multiple systems for maintaining homeostasis. People mentioned sweating. That is a system to maintain your temperature. Shivering is part of the temperature maintenance system. So the two big things that you control, we talked about this the first week. Your temp, and what else? Temperature and water balance. Okay? And your water balance system, you have ways of shedding excess water, and you have ways of conserving water. So when you stop sweating, your body is conserving water. That's actually one of the signs of heat stroke. When you're really, really hot and you stop sweating, that's bad. When you're really, really hot and you get goosebumps, that's bad. So your body is attempting to conserve water. It's attempting to increase the surface area of your skin so that you can cool down more effectively. Those are signs that you need medical attention. So those are the things that you can control. What about a tree? Can a tree control its temperature? Can it? Let's take a vote. While trees can't control temperature, those leaves, on the underside of every leaf are a bunch of little holes. Have you ever seen these or pictures of them? Okay. They're microscopic in most cases, but you can see them under a microscope. Those little openings pull in gases because a tree needs what gas to grow? Any plant does. CO2. Okay, we'll pick it up after lunch. If you have an opening like on the undersides of these leaves where you're taking in gases, guess what else you're losing? Moisture. You're losing some moisture through those little openings. Just like when you're breathing through your mouth with a stuffed up nose, you lose moisture in your mouth. So a tree, in order to be able to take in gases, has to give up some moisture. Winter air is drier than summer air. Cold air is drier. It's harder to keep moist in the winter. A lot of people get dry skin in the winter. You get static, your hair stands up, all that stuff. If the tree gets rid of its leaf for the winter, it helps it preserve its water. It goes into a state of dormancy. It loses its leaves to help it maintain its moisture. Now, let me make one side comment. Okay, so all organisms have to maintain homeostasis. For organisms that can't do anything about their temperature. Like we said, a plant can't do anything about its temperature. It can't control it. A single-celled organism can't control its temperature. This bacteria, it can control its water balance, but what happens if we raise the temperature on one of those single-celled organisms? What happens if we make it really hot? It dies. This is why we cook hamburger to 140 degrees. This is why we cook chicken to 160 degrees. Because those single-celled organisms can't control their temperature. They can control their water balance. If you get them too hot, they die. So cooking food to a prescribed temperature kills bacteria because they don't have a way to control temperature. They lack a way to maintain homeostasis as it relates to temperature. Okay, so all living things grow. All living things grow. You've grown a lot from your humble beginnings as a single fertilized cell. Just look at you now. All living things grow. And there are two ways to do that. Cell division. You can add more cells. And, or in some cases, cell enlargement. So what kind of organisms, well, I'll let you fill in your partial blanks. So what kind of living organisms, so some living organisms grow by cell enlargement alone. They don't grow through cell division. So we have, remember, two strategies to grow, two ways to grow. One, so your only options for growing are making your cells bigger or getting more cells. How about you? Which one of these strategies have you taken? You've definitely gotten more cells. Most of you are probably at your adult height now or pretty close to it. For some guys, they get a growth spurt in their late teens or early 20s. Most females, by 14 or 15, are at adult height. Now, all of you can still grow, even if you don't grow taller. Unfortunately, the tendency as you age is that you add mass, but it's not upward, it's outward. And you do that, same thing, two ways. Get more cells, make your cells bigger. Those are the only options for growing. So starting off from all of you, if we had taken a snapshot of all of you when you were 1 week old, you were little. I'm sure you were all adorable. You've added a lot of cells since then. Some of your individual cells have also gotten larger. So you employ both strategies. You get more cells, your cells get a little bit bigger. But for the most part, growing up is a process of getting more cells. That's true for most multicellular organisms. What kind of organisms can only engage in one of these strategies? There's my little single-celled organism. Can that single-celled organism get bigger by adding more cells? No! That's it. It only gets one cell. But from the point at which it starts off its life, it gains size by adding to that cell. So when we have a single-celled organism that splits into two single-celled organisms, in other words, it reproduces how? They're identical to their parents. There's nobody else's genetic material. It's asexual. Asexual. So this single-celled organism reproduces asexually. Neither of these new cells are the same size as the original cell. What do they have to do? They got to get bigger. They have to add material, and that's what they do. So that's a single-celled organism can only get bigger using that first strategy. You do both, and you do a lot more of the second one. You add cells all the time. Okay, so for a single-celled organism, the only strategy they can take is to make their cells bigger. For you, you mostly get more cells but you do some of making your cells bigger. Now, the exception is if you add mass through fat, which we all do from time to time. When mammals, especially, I know this in mammals, add mass through fat, both processes happen. So your individual fat cells get bigger, and then at a certain point you start adding additional fat cells. So you can shrink your fat cells. Once you've created a fat cell, you can't get rid of it without like sucking it out surgically. So you mostly do this, get more cells, where a single-celled organism can just make their cells bigger. Okay, adult organisms arise through development. And this is a word that we've not talked about yet. We've talked about differentiation. We've talked about specialization. Development is how you become a fully mature organism. And you guys are pretty darn close to fully mature. What's interesting is your guts actually still have some growing to do. A lot of you are at full size, but you'll still sort of, I guess, like beef up a little bit before you hit real full adult maturity in your early 20s. So your guts and your brains still have some development, but you're pretty close. So development, we take that single egg and that little single sperm, we put them together, and we get one fertilized egg, one cell, which splits into 2 cells, which splits into 4 cells, and into 8 cells, and on and on and on. And each time one of these divisions happens, you've got more cells, and they start off as what? They haven't gone through differentiation. They are stem cells. They're stem cells. They can do any job in the body. Anything. Now, at a certain point, those stem cells start to go through what process? What is it? Differentiation. They become specialized. Suddenly, it's no longer capable of being anything. It's a muscle cell. It's a bone cell. It's a brain cell. It's a blood cell. So we have all these stem cells, and they start to differentiate. They become specialized, and they keep reproducing. Once they're differentiated, they can only reproduce the same kinds of cells they are. Your muscle cells. So imagine a muscle cell in your arm. When that muscle cell reproduces, it can't form a bone cell, it can't form a blood cell, it can't form a nerve cell. It can only form a muscle cell. It's differentiated, it can only give rise to another differentiated cell. So they keep multiplying and they keep differentiating. It repeats a lot. And that's how development happens. That's how you go from a single cell, single fertilized egg, to something that has a heart and lungs and skin and bones and blood and vessels and hair and muscles. It's kind of amazing. All that happens because those cells keep dividing, keep differentiating. That's growth. Okay, reproduction. All living things are capable of reproducing. All living things can reproduce. And reproduction does not ensure the survival of the individual. Whether you reproduce or not, it will not extend your life. But individuals have to reproduce or the species dies out. Which is why it's such a strong drive. Asexual reproduction is a line of organisms that are unchanged from their parent organisms. They're identical. They are identical. Asexual reproduction means a line of identical organisms. Sexual reproduction allows for new traits and diversity in offspring. If you have biological well, actually, you know what the better example is? A litter of puppies. Who has seen a litter of puppies? Excellent. Were they all identical? Even among purebreds, very often you get some variation. You get size variation. You may have shade variation. You know, and then down to markings and everything else. So sexual reproduction gives you not only new traits, but diversity in offspring. You might have one puppy that's just bigger and stronger than the rest. Okay, so what kinds of organisms reproduce asexually? Single-celled, always. Because single-celled organisms don't have a reproductive system. There is no reproductive system. So if you are a single-celled organism, like a bacteria, your only option is to split. And each of your offspring will split. And it keeps on going, and it keeps on going, and there's no variation, and they all look just the same. Not all that exciting, but it's a great way to take over the world. I'm going to run out of room for my bacteria here. So asexual reproduction gives you a lineup of identical, no changes, no diversity, no nothing offspring. What happens if conditions change and these guys, however well adapted they were in the past, suddenly aren't anymore? They all kiss it goodbye. Oops. Disregarding the fact that the stems and leaves typically aren't white or red. Plants reproduce sexually. They can reproduce asexually too. We're going to talk about the sexual reproduction here. So we have two plants that reproduce. And of their offspring, we might have some white ones. We might have some red ones. And it might get even weirder. Maybe we've got some pink ones. Maybe we've got some that are red and white. That's diversity in offspring. And that diversity goes far beyond color. It goes far beyond surface. But that allows for diversity in your offspring. Okay. That concludes section 2 in your chapter. Now, what we're going to do tomorrow, you're going to be doing the section review. I will give you the first part of our class, 5A, to work on it.